A problem, plastic is a problem, but we do get a lot of resources from the ocean, which is why we need to conserve our oceans and make sure that they are healthy, because we get a lot of stuff from them. You have two types of resources. You have renewable resources and finite resources. Renewable resources are resources that can be replaced with time. So, like for example, wood. If you chop down a tree but you plant another tree, the tree that you plant will replace the one that you chopped down. So eventually it will replace itself. Fish are also considered to be a renewable resource because if you only catch so many fish and you leave some of them behind, the ones that you leave behind will reproduce and replace themselves. Unless you don't catch them sustainably and then you take them all out and then they all die. It's bad. A finite resource, though, is something that once you get all of it out, so once you mine all the gold in the world, there is no more. So there's only so much of it on Earth, and after that it's done. So gold would be an example. Also, fresh water is also a finite resource. And like while we do get some recycling of the water through the water cycle, there's only some percentage of the water on Earth that is involved in that water cycle at any given time. So there's only actually so much fresh water on Earth. Okay, so you have renewable and finite resources. One of the things that we get from the ocean that could be considered to be a renewable resource, as long as it's done properly, is fish and other animals. So the things that we actually want to get out of the ocean, like the fish and the crabs and the stuff that we like to eat, those we would call our targeted take, or our target take. So those are the things that we target to get out of the ocean. So those are going to be the plants and the animals that you want to catch. So you can have all sorts of different kinds of things, like algae. You can also have different kinds of invertebrates like shellfish. So you can use like clams, oysters, scallops, and mussels. You also get things like crab and shrimp and lobster. You get sea urchins for uni. You also get all sorts of different kinds of fish. So sardines, anchovies, mackerel, tuna, salmon, so on and so forth. And then we also use some of the targeted take as tropical ornamentation. So we take like live rock or corals, and then all sorts of like reef fish to be part of our aquariums that we like to keep in our houses. So targeted take are the things that we mean to get, that we want to catch. Bycatch. Bycatch are things that we catch that we don't mean to. So both we could like not want them because either they're too small or they're too big or there's no market for them, but we still catch them. And bycatch is actually a huge issue because many times once like the bycatch is caught with what we actually want, we just toss them back overboard, and many times when we toss them back overboard, they're already dead at that point. So remember when we talked about the Ted and like the turtles and the shrimp fishermen? So the shrimp fishermen were catching lots of green sea turtles, and then the turtles, by the time they pulled up the nets, the turtles were drowned and dead. So one of the problems with bycatch is that by the time we get those nets back up to the boat, the things that are in there have already died. So there's no possible way for it to make its way back to its habitat and like continue its role. We also have the problem of some of the things can't actually make it back to their habitat. So if you pull up deep sea animals, because you're trawling or something like that, and you pull them up, and if they're not already dead, there's no way that they can make it back down to the deep sea from the epipelagic without either dying or something eating them on the way down. So no way they can return to that habitat. And then also, when you toss them back, a lot of times if they are still alive, they're kind of stunned, disoriented, and then very vulnerable to predators, so they get eaten as well. So it's bad because these animals are dying at crazy rates just for us to get a few things that we want. Alright, so let's look at some uses that we have for our target take. So one of the uses that we can use all of these target take animals for is to eat them directly. So we can eat these plants and animals directly, either in terms of like sashimi or sushi, or you can buy like a fillet of fish and eat that for dinner, or you can have some sort of like shellfish and like in chowder, so like clam chowder, or you can even go to like a raw bar and you can eat some of these things raw or steamed. And then you can also eat like calamari. If you ever have like the crunchy seaweed snack soup, those are algae. So you can eat that target take directly. Sometimes we take the target take and then we actually like grind up the fish and we use this as fertilizer. So take the fish, grind them up very finely, and use it as fertilizer. And this kind of fertilizer is actually sold in most markets as organic fertilizer. So a lot of your organic foods are grown with like fish as fertilizer. All right? Yeah. So it's the organic or natural fertilizer. And here's some pictures so you can see what that might look like. We can also take and use that target take as fish meal. So it can be ground up and then used in all sorts of different kinds of things, like in dog food. So sometimes if you have a dog, their food will have some of this fish meal in it. And then we can also use it in like aquaculture. So we'll take and we'll feed fish or fish meal to like the fish that we're trying to raise for like monetary purposes. So we can feed it to like bluefin tuna as we try and raise bluefin tuna because they make a lot of money for it. The problem with this, and we can also feed it to things like cattle and stuff like that, pigs, chickens that we find on land. But the problem is that's really, really inefficient. So typically the kinds of things that we are fishing out of the ocean that go into making these fish meal are like things that are like sardines. So they're filter feeders. So they are going to be both primary consumers and secondary consumers depending on what they're eating, right? So they will, if they're eating the phytoplankton, they'll be primary consumers. If they're eating like the copepods and stuff, they will be secondary consumers. If we take a bunch of those animals out, we grind them up, and then we feed them to a cow, and a cow is an herbivore, right? You're taking something that normally is eating the primary producer directly, so it's a primary consumer, and you're feeding them these things that aren't natural for them to eat. And then second, they are already like technically in a comparison of the food chain a step above those animals. So you're kind of taking a higher level of the food chain and feeding it to a lower level. Does that make sense? And then that's also a problem because remember when we talked about energy being passed up the food chain, only 10% gets passed on. So you now take this upper level of the food chain, you take it and you feed it to these cattle, and if you take 1 million pounds of those fish, it's only going to produce 0.1 million pounds of beef. So we're better off eating the fish rather than eating the beef. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. We can also just use part of the thing that we catch. So like we've already previously talked about this year, shark finning. So we will take and cut off the fins of sharks, toss the body back because there's no market for it, and then keep the fins and sell the fins. The problem with this, like we've already discussed, sharks are very long-lived species. They take a long time to replace themselves. So it's bad because we're taking out all of these top predators of the ocean that can't replace themselves as fast as we are taking them out. So it's a problem. Okay, let's look at some of the fishing methods.